probably stuck in Washington traffic. As soon as she comes, I'll give her the chairmanship. Zainab is the executive director of the American Islamic Congress. We are really honored to have Margot Badran, Saada Douada, and Binaz Toprak with us. I think Zainab walked in. Okay. There it is. I just introduced you.
Thank you.
So start.
I appreciate it.
Okay. You have, we need to introduce the our speakers, but everybody has their bios.
Excellent. Well, good morning, and I'm sorry for being late. It's always great to be here, and with Woodrow Wilson Center, and a very timely subject, which is the Islamic feminism and beyond the new frontier. So it's one of these topics that we always talk about and mention, and especially now in the new era when Islamic feminism, it's become more and more important subject in the Muslim world, as we see all around the world people are paying attention more to women's rights in the Muslim world and how it's been developed in the past few decades. Many people say that women rights have been declined in the past 20 years or so, and some say no, actually women gain more rights. So when we talk about equality, family and society in the Muslim world, we talk about very important subject in the society, and this subject can change a lot of pillars and a lot of laws and a lot of discussion around. And with that subject, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Margot Badran is a senior scholar here at Woodrow Wilson Center and senior fellow at Prince Al Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding at Georgetown University. Activism for change in family laws and practice lessons from the Egyptian past for the global present. Please, Margot.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and it's very nice. I'm happy to see everyone here, and we had a wonderful first panel, and so we'll continue some of the issues that were raised. I will stick rather closely to my script, and it will be broad brush, and I'll try to provide a little background because I'm looking at lessons from the Egyptian past for the global present around activism for effecting change in family laws and practices. And I would just like to also say sort of these little a couple of points up front. If it were a chapter, I'd put it down underneath before I started. And one was what Hale said in the beginning of the theme of all of us being bound together. In other words, we're all in it together. And for me, it's a big all. And I will actually be addressing something slightly different, and that is our collectivity across religious difference. So trans-communal or trans-religious affiliation, togetherness, if you will. And Naire said something about organized religion is as much about power as belief. And so I will be talking a bit about this whole issue of power. I will be, as I said, it will be broad brush. I will be hinting at certain things. I'll try to make some definitions, and then you can fill in what is needed with your questions. So I'll start off setting the ground historically and then enumerating a few lessons for the global present. And of course, this is activism and feminist activism and thinking. Women in Egypt were pioneers early last century in the Middle East and beyond in organizing independent, collective feminist activism. On the occasion of the new parliament in 1923, 2 years after winning quasi-independence from British rule, women as feminist and nationalist activists placarded their first set of comprehensive demands outside the Parliament building, which they were not allowed to enter for the ceremony of the opening of this Parliament. The comprehensive set of demands included calls to reform the Muslim Personal Status Law Code. Egyptian activist women, Muslims and Christians together, insisted upon the enjoyment of their rights as equal citizens that the new constitution guaranteed to all Egyptians, irrespective of gender and religion. Activist women set about to participate together with male citizens to build a modern independent nation state. I'm talking now post-1922 with the Declaration of Independence, as I say, imperfect, quasi. As women had previously cooperated with men in the militant stage of the national independence movement, when they demanded the dual liberation of the woman and the nation. So they were working at the same time for both causes. They did not put the cause of the nation in front of themselves, in front, or prioritize it. Feminists, and I'll get to definitions, and for probably many of you it'll be repetitive, but feminists, also referred to as secular feminists, a secular feminist is a term which was used interchangeably with Egyptian feminists. They were defined by their shared national identity as equal citizens of the Egyptian nation state who were also members of different religious communities, Muslims and Christians of various denominations, whose family relations, rights, and obligations were regulated by their own separate religious laws. So you had citizens whose rights were guaranteed, all Egyptians' rights were guaranteed under the Constitution, guaranteed equal rights, and then at the same time, Christians and Muslims were organized by their own separate personal status codes, and here the principle of equality, that is gender equality, was not operative. Egyptian women's feminism included secular nationalist, Islamic, modernist or reformist, and humanist strands. And the issue came up about the feminism as the importance and necessity of feminism as being indigenous or from within. And so often people, especially now, they think that Islamic feminism is the only indigenous feminism. I mean, Islamic feminism as it emerged and was named and shaped from the 1990s. And so I think we have to be very careful not to equate secular with Western or with non-religion or with the foreign. I think that's very important, and it's important, also has implications today because secular is a category which allows citizens of the same country and different religions to be conceptualized together. And we speak so much of Muslim this and Islam that, and I keep thinking in many of our countries we have other religions, and so therefore what are the implications for an equality for all? So feminists through, and I'm speaking in general of feminists in early 20th century, and by the way, I'll be speaking in broad terms historically, but I'm a historian and I'm very aware that we need to anchor things in time and place and class. So if you need some details to be spun out, I can, but I'm speaking at this other level. Feminists, through their daily lives, which varied according to class and circumstances, experienced and understood the connectivity between family, state, and society, and yet they also experienced a certain split between the public sphere of the state and the private sphere of the family. And so these are terms, I mean, the public-private is very porous. I don't even like to use it, but analytically sometimes we have to in order to sort of make points. But there's this kind of tension and complexity between the connected and the split element. The public sphere has been governed by secular laws, that is, national laws, and the private or family sphere was governed by religiously backed but state enacted. So again, the Muslim Personal Status Code and the various Christian codes, which are now one, actually, that is the Christian codes, are based on interpretations of religion, but they are enacted by the state. So there is that complexity too. Within the framework of the religiously backed personal status codes, the principle of equality that the Constitution guarantees is not operative. Rather, the notion of gender complementarity is expressed in the personal status codes, and the model of the family is a patriarchal model, so there is not gender equality. So there is that tension of equality and non-equality, and I'm going to try to run through. I'm skipping a few things. Now, I'm trying to understand how Egyptians of both religions today as well as before, I mean, can hold these two kind of categories and identities, and how everybody can be equal. And it's not terribly easy. Now, there were two matters, and I'm keeping the focus, of course, on the personal status codes, family laws, but there are two matters relating to the family that have affected all Egyptians and that aren't regulated within the separate Muslim religiously backed personal status codes. And one was early in this last century was the absence of a minimum marriage age. Now, the Egyptian Feminist Union, which was organized in 1923, one of the first two demands they made was for calling for an equal marriage age, a minimum marriage age, and that was there was a decree law that was done in 1923, and that applied to Muslims and Christians. And I must say that the Egyptian Feminist Union, the secular feminists, were included Muslims and Christians from day one, and they were working together in their promoting their set of demands, including calling for the revision of the Muslim Personal Status Code, and Christians who were part of the Egyptian Feminist Union backed this. And yes, the Muslims might have taken the more front line, but the point was that the Christians could easily back it. And the whole idea, if you're backing equality within the Muslim personal status laws, you're also, in a way, backing equality in yours and more generally speaking. And just as an aside, I saw similar transcommunal solidarity activism enacted in Nigeria when these women a couple of women were accused of zina, and they were going to be stoned to death. And Christian women, together with Muslim women, they raised the money, they provided the legal support and other psychological support, and they had no problems. I was there shortly after this interviewing women across the communal divide. The second issue, we're back in Egypt now, is inheritance. And inheritance is a separate law. It's not part of either Christian or Muslim personal status laws. It's separate law, and it's binding on all Egyptians. However, this separate law, which is a secular state law, is actually influenced by the commonly held principle Islamic principle of unequal inheritance. In other words, generally speaking, men would get twice as women. It's more complex than that. But that law applies across the boards to all Egyptians. And so the point is that everybody has a stake in dealing with that law. The secular state law, reflecting a patriarchal mindset, I'm talking about this unequal passing down of wealth, subverts the principle of equality enshrined in the Constitution. And so here is a very concrete example of where in something having to do with personal status, that both Muslim and Christian citizens have strong stakes in dealing with this. Egyptians who have been widely recognized as feminist pioneers and advocating for women's rights and equality of citizens over the years have achieved many successes, especially in the area of education and work, and others as well. But while feminist demands and debates paved the way for the eventual winning of formal political rights granted on high from the state in 1956, and we talked quite a bit in the previous panel about this. And yes, it was during Nasser's time, and it was decreed that all citizens, that women would have the right to vote, but the groundwork had been done over a period of a half a century, and calling for equal political rights was right there in the agenda of the comprehensive rights that were placarded in front of Parliament in 1924. These rights, these successes were in the public secular arena, which endorses an egalitarian model of state and society and hence fits with the agenda. Again, we'd have to fine-tune that. It's not perfect, but that's the broad point. The feminists' major failure was to attain significant reform in the Muslim Personal Status Code, which sustains patriarchy and restricts it to the family and the private, where the state allows religion freer hand. In other words, patriarchy can find a more robust expression in the private sphere. Again, please don't. Everything is far more complex than I'm saying. So I'm quite aware of that. But that's a general observation. Okay, so to this day, Egypt's personal status code remains minimally, virtually unchanged. There have been some alterations, preserving a rather robust patriarchal model of the family, and with it displaying a conservative approach to Islam, which is little affected by the new feminist ijtihad or an Islamic feminist critique. Islamic feminism. Now, I use the term in a very, a term that was it was invented or was first started to be used in the early 1990s by Muslims who described a new paradigm that was emerging. So it was a term that was created, and I've used that term. Now, particularly, Islamic feminism as a term is very loosely used. We have to define what do we mean, because it means almost everything to everybody, and it gets very collapsed with Muslim and Islamic and all this sort of thing. And the Islamic feminism first appeared as a discourse about 2 decades ago, simultaneously in different parts of the globe. This was unlike earlier secular feminisms, which appeared in the form of social movements in national locations. Now, the Islamic feminism articulates the principles of gender equality and social justice, grounded in rereadings of religious sources. Islamic feminist argumentation is a powerful tool to use to promote a shift from a patriarchal to an egalitarian framing of Muslim personal status law. So there's a lot more sharp argumentation that can be brought to the table. In the elaboration of Islamic feminist thinking and in conducting Islamic feminist activism, issues of authority, legitimacy, and identity are raised. And this is a very big thing at the moment. And Fahale asked, what is Islamic feminism and beyond the new frontier? And I'm kind of getting into that, moving in that direction now. Many assume or assert that Islamic feminism is a matter for Muslims only. Others argue that Islamic feminism is not tied to identity or to a belief position, and that anyone can use the discourse of Islamic feminism in making equality claims and engaging in activism. And there are people who are not Muslim who do claim to be Islamic feminists. They usually claim to be secular feminists. They may claim to be American feminists or Egyptian, because we have multiple identities, we have multiple locations, and so for somebody who's not a Muslim to claim to be an Islamic feminist simply means, as I analyze it and observe it, to use this discourse to make your point. So you're not using the discourse, say a UN human rights discourse in this instance, or a national constitutional. Now it's gotten more complex now because Islamic feminists are using a more holistic discourse, but that was the idea, that you can make your claims, your fundamental claims, grounded in religious analysis. Now, a global, I'm setting all this up to get where I want to go. A global movement for equality in the Muslim family was launched a year ago, called Musawa, or Musawa, or whatever you pronounce it, meaning, and the term means equality. And they announced that this was actually launched. I mean, it was kind of an officially launched movement that happened a year ago now, or roughly, maybe, in Kuala Lumpur. And there was a massive sort of meeting that gathered, conference. But an immediate question is, what is the Muslim family? What kind of families do Muslim personal status codes regulate? I mean, we know what Muslim personal status law is, or the idea, which is grounded in interpretations of Islam. But what is the family that is being ordered? What is a Muslim family, and what is a family? And I return to this in a moment. But first, we observe that the Musawa movement is driven by Muslims. And from what I saw in Kuala Lumpur and what I saw in Egypt this winter, there are no non-Muslims in this equality movement. The direction of the Musawa movement is from outside to inside, that is, from the global arena to national locations aiming to fuel local feminisms. Oh, I thought you were giving me a signal. The Musawa movement is spearheaded by a small group of scholar activists and veteran activists, social movement folks, who bring together an impressive array of intellectual and activist energy, and who are new feminist pioneers tackling the old holdout of patriarchy that is in the family, and a holdout that is justified in the name of Islam. And the Musawa movement is drawing upon a repertoire of Islamic feminist discourse, as I mentioned, and constitutional law and human rights discourses. But it's very important and fundamental, and at the core of the Musawa movement is using the power of Islamic feminist reinterpretation, connecting it to this other. So in some interesting way, it's like the earlier secular feminists who had Islamic modernist or Islamic reformist strand along with secular nationalist in that day, this is early last century, and humanitarian discourses. So they are coming together in the Musawa movement. In the era we are in of continuing hyper mobilization of religious identity in general, and of course it's not just among Muslims, there are signs that many Islamic feminists are becoming exclusivists or rallying around religious identity. And I see this, I mean, partly I study this intensively, and I have studied feminisms over the years intensively, and I move around a lot to workshops and conferences and invited lectures and little and teaching and so on. So I see this quite clearly. Now, this raises issues of how citizens of different religions are able to interact around questions relating to furthering furthering equality and justice, especially in the arena of personal status laws. Now, I have 1 minute, but I will go very quickly. So what I did was I set up the historical context and grounding for my question. What are the lessons from the Egyptian past for the global present concerning activism for change in the family? And let me very quickly go through. Number one, the importance of locally driven activisms, because the Musawa movement now is dropping in to locations. Before, the movements were in and they would connect out. And this is becoming a problem. So there's sort of the Muslim personal status laws are enacted locally, that is, by nation states, drawing on readings of fiqh developed or prevailing locally and in national contexts with their own historical, sociological, cultural, religious, demographic, and political realities. The local anchoring of early Egyptian feminist activism, it sprang from Egyptian soil and was attentive to local beliefs, attitudes, politics, and laws already in place. The local activists were clear about their priorities in moving ahead, and my point is that I can see a certain displacement because in the Musawa movement, because folks are coming in and they're somehow bringing their own set of priorities and their own kind of, sometimes it gets preachy. And the people from the inside know best what's going on. And so that's number one. And that we can take the lesson from earlier feminist history in Egypt. Second one, continuing with the observation made of importance of understanding local empirical realities, also relates to achieving conceptual realities. Clarity. Egyptian feminists had a firm grip on their own particular context and how families were constituted and different and operated in different moments. This needs there's a need. There needs to be clarity on what constitutes family in national locations, and here's what I have the problem with the Muslim family, because the Musawa movement immobilizes Islamic, and many of the folks in it actually were creators and promoters, of the discourse. But the thing is, it refers to the family as the object of reform, but is it more relevant to speak of the family? Because in Muslim majority, and this is on the ground empirical realities, it's in that context I raise this. In Muslim majority countries today, and let's say, speak of Egypt as an example, religiously mixed marriages are noticeably increasing. And because women in these countries are prohibited, Muslim women are prohibited from marrying non-Muslim men, this means that non-Muslim women are marrying Muslim men. The family, or the families they form, are religiously mixed families. They're not a Muslim family. So you can have a Muslim in a family and a non-Muslim in a family, and I don't see how you can call it the Muslim family or any other kind of a family. It is not just Muslim, but non-Muslim women who are governed by also by Muslim personal status laws. So on the one hand, the family, I don't know why we can call it the Muslim family, but we do have Muslim personal status codes. And if you are a non-Muslim woman and you're married to a Muslim man, then you're governed by the Muslim personal status code, and you have a stake in getting involved in that activism. So it shouldn't be just around identity. And there's another whole problem here, because the Musawa movement and Islamic feminists in general are advocating dual headship, male and female headship of family, like was just enacted in the Mudawana, so that if you have two heads of family, the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, and if you have mixed religions, then you've got to have equality of religion. And how do you square all this? And nobody's looking into this. And also how you can make the equality in society be mirrored in the family. I think I have 3 seconds, 2 seconds. The point was that I wanted to stress the need for trans-communal activism at the global and the local level. And the last question, I wouldn't even develop it, but what is needed, and Nairi already pointed this out and others here, what is needed now is not more theology, but more effective politics. And to have more effective politics, everybody has to be included. We cannot have exclusivity. And we have to bring all the talent on board at all levels. And I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. It was very interesting to look at equality and musawa in Egypt. And we have our next speaker, and she will be focusing on Morocco. And the case of Morocco, we want to draw comparison between the evolvement that happened in the family status law in the Kingdom of Morocco. So our next speaker is Suad Dawada. Okay, I'm trying. She's an assistant professor at Department of English in Ibn Tufayl University in Morocco. She will be speaking about women and the politics of reform in Morocco.
Thank you. I would like first to join all the participants to thank the organizers of this great conference, Dr. Hari and Dr. Margot Badran, as well as Mona and Kindra. Amen. The first panel was like an introduction to some of the things that I would like to talk about. Especially Amani's presentation introduced the case of Morocco and what happened with the history of the reform. So I'm not gonna go back to the details of the reform and the law because it was already mentioned in this presentation. What I would like to focus on is, after the reform, what happened and problems with the implementation of the law, as well as, introduce my paper with how, this reform happened within a context where Morocco, announced its political will to open up to the world and start a series of reform that started in the 90s. And we have to remember also the impact of the international pressure that brought this reform to the ground. The other thing is that this reform opened up the ground or the space for feminist claims that basically started end of 80s, as many beginning of the 90s, and that was always being contested by the Islamist voice. The other significant date is 2003. Morocco had its own 9/11 in Casablanca attacks, and that is produced an atmosphere where the Islamists, were pointed out as being the origin of what happened. That Morocco was always a Muslim country, but there is what is called Moroccan Islam, and this Moroccan Islam is supposed to be a moderate Islam, drawing its, or inspired by, Sufism as a kind of like spiritual, moderate Islam that is compatible with the language of equality, democracy, and so on. To the point now that the Moroccan state is promoting, ideas about this, compatibility between Islam and democracy, Islam and women's rights, and is, encouraging all kinds of projects in that. I could go back to this in details during the debate, but I'm going to focus basically on, because of the time constraints, on, who was behind this reform, and also touch upon a point that was mentioned in the first panel with regard to the language of feminism and how much does it speak to women all over the countries with regard to illiteracy rate, with regard to lots of issues that makes of the language of feminism problematic within certain contexts, and I will explain why. So for decades, the question of Moroccan nation has been formulated in relation to the religion of the state, but since the series of reform announced in the 90s, a supplementary question has been added that if representation and political representation of the individual citizen, this newly created space for citizenship has been at least in part initiated by Moroccan feminists' claims for secularization of the legal system in general and family and penal codes in particular. Now we have the next debate after the Mudawana reform there is a debate around the amendment of the penal code for more recognition of women's individual rights and issues like abortion and sexual rights are being raised by feminist groups in the country. So in this paper I will describe the notion of equal rights put forward by the 2004 reform of the Family Code, as well as the feminist current campaign for the amendment of the Penal Code. I will note the challenges that of the implementation of the 2004 Family Code, especially in rural areas, and discuss alternative ideology of gender justice predating these reforms. The Moroccan Family Code, now the only Sharia-based legal text in the country, can be identified as the foremost site in which, quote, Moroccan Muslim identity is articulated, as a legal text in which gender policy is founded on, quote, religious and evidence labeled in terms of the Muslim identity of the state. The Moroccan Family Code inextricably links the legal status of women and men to the religious foundation of political power. This interdependence of the political and the religious, together with the socially mobilizing conservative discourses, had made it difficult for Moroccan liberal feminists to ground their claims on local cultural and social footholds of gender equality. Relying exclusively on universal values of gender equality to claim rights for women has, however, proved its limitations, since it does not address the religious, political, and political terms in which women's status is defined. While declaring the amendment of the Family Code text at the opening of the Parliament in fall 2003, King Mohammed VI stated, I quote, "It is necessary to be mindful of the tolerant aim of Islam, which advocates human dignity, equality, and harmonious relations, and rely on the cohesiveness of Malikite and right and ijtihad," end of quote. Based on the egalitarian spirit of Quran and Sunnah, the king used one of the royal prerogatives of the commander of the faithful to break with some of the males' legal privileges, such as guardianship over women, repudiation, and so on. And while on the 1957, the Family Code text defined the family as a union for procreation under the leadership of the husband, with a determination of gender roles in terms of authoritative purveyor husband and obedient domestic worker wife. The amended text defines the family in terms of a partnership between two equal modern Muslim citizens. This reform would have probably never taken place without liberal feminists enduring an effective activism for legal gender equality. Moroccan feminist advocacy for women's rights, including the current feminist campaign for the amendment of the Penal Code, is premised on universal human rights as the exclusive, as the only referential and framework within which women issues need to be addressed. Which means that religion is always anti-women. The current feminist advocacy for the secularization of the penal code and the codification of women's individual freedom, including the legalization of abortion, is challenged by Islamist fatwas for boycotting male gynecologists, because according to them it is more appropriate for Muslim women to see a female than a male gynecologist. Am I pronouncing it right? Yeah. feminist advocacy for the removal of women issues from the realm of the religious to that of the temporal is countered by the Islamists' resistance for the preservation of the last bastion of the Moroccan Muslim identity, that is women and family. The shift of the debate from direct confrontations to an indirect contest on what should constitute the referential for legislation or policy making, universal human rights or Islamic ideals shows a type of radicalization of this dichotomy, Islamists versus feminists, whose consequences remain to be seen. This dichotomic debate that mostly carries out French debates on issues such as the veil, secularism in Islam, female emancipation versus oppression has constructed gender equality as a synonym of abandoning local Muslim cultures in espousing a supposedly inherently egalitarian Western culture. Feminist groups' promotion of a universal, singular, laïque model for gender equality, as well as the rejection of any serious engagement with Sharia religion, has furthered the alienation of feminist values and contributed to growth of assumptions that feminism and Islam are essentially mutually exclusive. In a 2005 Sisters in Islam publication, one of the leading Moroccan feminists NGOs that led the reform that I mentioned earlier, Amin al-Marini, identified the, quote, official, conservative, and political Islam as the main antagonists of any feminist project in the country. This assessment does not, however, lead her to rethink her position with regard to religion, and instead she keeps on upholding what she calls universal values and what she mentions as sociological perspective over the religious one. I quote, "The collective succeeded, collective means her association, succeeded in transferring the debate on women's rights in the public arena from the religious point of view to the social one, insisting particularly on the daily problems that women face, such as divorce, polygamy, and violence." End of quote. While Lammarini rightly points out the feminist success in integration of the sociological perspective in legal construction of gender, the exclusion of religion from the debate on gender issues is not tenable. In his 2003 address, announcement of the Family Code Amendment, King Mohammed VI stated that Sharia and human rights values are the framework within which the amendments on the Family Code is to be placed. The official discourse attempts to reconcile between... I learned 3 minutes. Okay, within... so I try to finish quickly. So the official discourses attempt to reconcile between Islam and feminism, in fact, countered by the Islamists and feminist intensified polarity. While the Islamists are stage managing controversy on gender to fulfill particular political ambitions, the feminist essentialist and rigidly secular meaning of the rights of Moroccan women is in fact freezing the debate on gender equality in secular religious polarities. In this sense, feminists in the name of gender equality are endorsing the same homogenizing thesis which was at the origin of the codification of the 97 Family Code text that suppressed existing local meaning of equity, such as al-kad wa si'aya. Al-kad wa si'aya refers to the practice of equitable reward for hard labor regardless of gender. This was a Sharia-based notion of gender justice developed by Moroccan jurisprudence in the Souss, or the Amazigh region especially. The post-independence nationalization policy and the advent of the 1957 Family Code led to the abolishment of Qad wa Si'aya as a local Sharia-based advanced right for women, which valued women's labor in the field and at home and granted to housewives and rural women working in agriculture the right for half of property accumulated during the marriage. This, in fact, is a right denied to women by Article 49 of the amended 2004 Family Code, largely based on the assumption of a woman as a modern, contract-making, detached, autonomous citizen with a salary in a formal economy. This understanding of single meaning of equality premised on non-existent conditions such as individualism, autonomy, access to education, to state institutions, such as and formal economy reduces the importance of the egalitarian intention of the 2004 Family Code. A recent ethnographic study in the Gharb region, one of the major rural areas in the country, showed that women filing cases of divorce or alimony rarely see a lawyer, either because they don't see the point of the visa or because it is too expensive and not worth the alimony they get that does not go beyond $30 per month for every child. Article 49 allows an option for the men and women to agree on a prenuptial agreement in terms of a contractual property framework within a separate document from the marriage contract, subject to civil law. This is, however, not possible for most couples, since most rural marriages are arranged between the husband and wife's families. So out of 400 concluded marriages in the same region, none of them use the contract in question. Further, the same research shows that women working for informal economy have no way to take part in this contract because of lack of legal evidence in terms of paperwork. The other significant information provided by this research is that none of the interviewed women knew about the new Family Code. So just to conclude, and without dismissing the importance of the achievement of feminist activism nor the positive, symbolic, and substantial change of the reform for middle-class, urban, educated women, the limitations of the reforms for rural women, as noted above, raises the question of how can we best create effective interventions on behalf of women's rights, and how can the debate on women's rights be more respectful of alternative notions of and practices of gender justice embraced by different segments of the population, rather than simply reflecting identity blocks such as Maliki Islam or secular universal feminism, on which the rules of legislation or policy making are currently based on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Saad, for the very informative paper about the reform in the Moroccan law or family law. Our next speaker is Banaz Topark, Professor of Political Science, Department of Political Science and International Relations at Bashir University in Istanbul. Recent amendment in the Turkish Civil and Criminal Code and the role of the feminist NGO. We're looking forward to hear about what you have to say.
Thank you. I'll join everybody else by thanking the organizers of this conference. It's a pleasure to be here. I also want to thank the few men in the audience. For some reason, men are hardly ever interested in women's issues, and I can't figure out why, because it affects everybody, both men and women, their life chances and lifestyle and so on. So thank you for being here. Both of these codes, I'll be talking about the Civil Code. The changes, amendments were accomplished in 2001. In this, that's the Civil Code, and the Penal Code 2004. Now, both of them go back to early years of the Republic, to 1926. The Civil Code was modeled after the Swiss Civil Code, and the Criminal Code, the Penal Code, was modeled after the Italian unfortunate for both, because as somebody mentioned, Switzerland is not a country that's known for its gender equality. Swiss women received the right to vote as late as 1976, believe it or not. And of course, Italy under Mussolini wasn't the best example to get a criminal code. So, since then, there have feminist groups, not since then actually, originally that wasn't the case, but both of these codes were problematic. Now, these codes originally, way back in the 1920s, were revolutionary for their time, replacing the Sharia, Muslim law. This was especially true of the Civil Code of 1926, which gave equal rights to men and women. Equal rights in marriage. It recognized only civil marriage, but not the religious. Equal rights in divorce, in custody over children, inheritance. It banned polygamy. And at the same time, it gave the right to Muslim women to marry anybody they wanted, Muslim or non-Muslim. Incidentally, this right to vote business has been mentioned for several countries. Turkish women received it as early to vote and be elected as early as the 1930s, early 1930s, although I must say that it didn't do them much, given the fact that Turkey ranks very, very low in terms of women's participation in politics. Right now it's something like 9%, which is ridiculous, but that's a different story. Now, until the 60s, women's groups were mostly content with these early Republican reforms. There wasn't much activity to advance the status of women. The idea was that, well, we received all our rights. What more do we want? And their activities, there were some women's groups, but their activities were mostly philanthropic activities. In the 60s and 70s, again, I think, who was it? Naira mentioned this, very much like in Iran and other places. Women's NGOs were part of the leftist movement, and the idea was that with socialism, everything will be taken care of. Once we have a socialist state, women's issues will disappear on their own. So it was not until after 1980, with this new wave of feminism, that women's issues received attention again. What was important here was the influence of feminist writing in the West, especially, of course, in the United States, for this new generation of women who originally gathered around consciousness-raising groups, as well as publications of journals and other publications on feminist themes, such as women's sexuality, sexual harassment, domestic violence, and the like. And thanks to their efforts, Turkey signed CEDAW, this UN Charter for all kinds of discrimination against women, in 1985. A year later, these groups organized a petition campaign to force the government to implement CEDAW articles. And their focus was the civil and the criminal codes. Now, in the 1990s and beyond, there was a wave of women's NGOs throughout the country. For example, in 1973, there were only 10 women's groups in Turkey. Between 1983 and 92, that increased to 64. By 2004, there were 350 women's NGOs, including women's groups in bar associations, in neighborhood organizations, gay and lesbian groups, organizations of Islamist women, and organizations of Kurdish women. And what is important, again, this was mentioned, new technologies and so on, that they began forming connections with the women's groups abroad, especially in Europe, because Turkey was being, was trying to be a candidate for membership in the European Union, and also getting funds from abroad. Now, the most important of these organizations was, for example, a women's library that began collecting everything and anything that was written on women by women, but also by others, men as well, on women. An association to fight against violence towards women. They called themselves the Purple Roof, and they had very interesting campaigns. A purple needle campaign, for example, where they were distributing purple needles to women to stick it to men when they were harassed in buses or in other public places. And the needles were huge, you know, with a purple ribbon tied to it. And they were also, of course, very influential in finding women's shelters for battered women. Another organization that has been trying to encourage women to take part in politics and has been campaigning for the adoption of a quota system. Unfortunately, not until now has the government did it. Another women's group in the southeastern Kurdish provinces that's dealing with honor killings, and they have some very interesting work there. A flying broom, you know, because they chose the name, meaning, well, you know, we're witches, and organizes, incidentally, a film festival of women directors each year in both Ankara and Istanbul. In addition, you had women's studies centers and academic programs opened in universities. A Turkish woman academic was elected to the expert members committee of SIDA, and another Turkish woman was elected to the European Women's Lobby. So these were very, very important in terms of empowerment of these feminist organizations. Now, by 2001, when the civil code changed, women's NGOs had become the most organized, politically most active, and most vocal civil society associations in the country, with access to funds, to foreign funds as well, to communication networks with European institutions and related NGOs throughout the world, and communicating with each other through the internet on a daily basis, which was something very, very important in terms of organizing their campaigns, lobbying, for example, members of parliament, almost camping in front of the parliament for days on end till they get what they want. Debating on TV. I don't have time, but maybe during the question period I could give you a few examples of those debates, which are very, very interesting. Publishing widely in daily newspapers, journals, etc. Even before these codes changed, these feminist groups had succeeded in changing 3 important articles. They annulled the annulment of the article in the Civil Code which stated that women need the husband's consent to work. So that was annulled. That was in the code in 1926. I mean, nobody really, when you applied for employment, nobody asked you for your husband's consent. But the idea was that if he wrote to your employer in writing that he didn't want you to work, then you could run into trouble. Repeat of an article in the criminal code that provided a 1/3 reduction in punishments for rape if the victim was a sex worker. Again, there's a story involved in this, which is an interesting story, which I can't tell right now. But the old criminal code had that. In other words, if you rape a sex worker, then your sentence was reduced to 1/3. The story being that a woman who was living with a man out of wedlock was considered to be a prostitute in her little community. She was raped, took the case to court, and the guy received this 1/3 sentence. So she let all of these feminist organizations know about the case, as a result of which there were debates on TV for weeks on end. The parliament had to meet in a special session to annul that article. And then they also, this is even before 2001, and for a new law on domestic violence enabling the victim to file a request with the public prosecutor for a protection order. This meant that the offender could not approach the woman's vicinity, whether at home or at work or any place else. This was for 6 months, and if he didn't comply, then he could be sent to prison after a court case was opened. At the same time, 3 minutes. I don't believe it. Oh, I have to explain these. How about 6? At the same time, abortion became legal. Now, I mean, I'll pass over this. What they did to change all of this. But let me get to the changes, and I'll finish. The civil code, because I think these are very, very important. Especially the criminal code, or you'd be surprised why it's so important, because it deals with violence against women and those issues. According to the new civil code, the husband is no longer the head of the family. The 26th code said that, and spouses have equal decision-making powers within the family. They have equal rights over family abode, as to where the family lives. I mean, this was especially problematic for professional women. If you have a job and your husband wants to move someplace else, he could sue you for divorce for not following him. And that was repealed. And most importantly, joint property regime, equal rights over property that's acquired during marriage. No matter on who's who has the title to the house or the car or whatever, if it's acquired during marriage, then you have equal rights. At the same time, the concept of illegitimate children was abolished. Custody belongs to the mother now. Women could retain their surname alongside their husband's surname. The old code had this permission from the husband to travel. That was repealed. If a woman is forced to marry somebody, she can file later on, even if she says yes originally during the civil marriage because she was forced. She can file later on and say that she was forced and ask to have it annulled. The minimum age for marriage was set for 18 for both men and women. Previously it was 15 for women, 17 for men. The present government again changed this to 17, and they're thinking of changing it back to 15, but women's groups are screaming. Things like that. If, for example, if the spouse, in case of divorce, is not awarded custody, then the person who's not awarded custody has to share the financial costs of children. Now, in the adultery, yeah, that's also in the civil grounds for divorce. In the old code, there was imprisonment attached to it. In 2005, for a while, that was repealed, and then in 2005, the AKP government wanted to put it back. There was an outcry, so that went. Women can apply to court for a legal separation of 1 to 3 years, and then that becomes grounds for divorce. And the whole language of the code changed. For example, husband, the terms husband and wife were replaced by spouse. And the legal language was simplified so all women could understand it. That is true of the penal code, and I'll finish in 2 minutes. These patriarchal concepts, I mean, it reflects the whole gestalt of the code, like chastity, honor, public morality, public customs, shame, decency, that the old criminal code had, were all eliminated. So there was this groundbreaking shift in the overall perspective of these new codes, legally acknowledging women's ownership of their bodies and sexuality. Now, for example, the old code classified sexual offenses under the clause crimes against society. That changed to crimes against individuals. And again, that had a sub-clause which said crimes against public morality and family. And that changed to crimes against inviolability of sexual integrity. I mean, this is symbolic, but I think it's important. Definition of rape was expanded to include oral and anal penetration, insertion of an object or an organ to the body, and so on. Psychological coercion was recognized, and also aggravated offenses were spelled out if these sexual assaults were carried under custody, if the woman was under custody, by security forces, by public officials, by employers, relatives, in-laws, and so on. And it also, the new code recognized sexual harassment at the workplace. The old code, and I'm finishing, had this clause that said that, children could consent to sexual relations. Children. That was, that notion of consent was completely removed. And again, the code spells out aggravated offenses if this sexual abuse is carried by parents, relatives, guardians, teachers, public health care providers, and so on. It recognizes marital rape. That's, in other words, that's criminalized. And most importantly, no reductions for honor killings. Previously, that was a cause for reduction, and generally families would give the job of killing the woman to the youngest kid in the family, below 18, so that he wouldn't get a life sentence. Now there are no reductions, and what's even more important, family members, if proven, who have decided on the honor killing, parents, fathers, uncles, big brothers, or even sometimes mothers and aunts, are also taken into custody. Now, and finally, and I'm finishing, two more. Indecent behavior, this is important, that was, the old code said indecent behavior. That has been amended because you could consider indecent, anything under indecent behavior. Only intercourse in public and exhibitionism was spelled out as indecent behavior. And no sentence, the old code had this: if a man married the woman that he raped, he received no sentence. And there were separate sentences if the raped woman was a virgin, non-virgin, married, widow, and so on. The widow, of course, raping the widow being the easiest of all of them, all of these categories. Those categories were all annulled. That's it, and I'll say
Thank
some
you
of the
very much.
papers. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting to hear about the implementations of these laws. And
It's just 20 minutes. I started
Well, it is
that
20
after.
it is 20 minutes per person. So you're on
Honestly, I
time.
looked at my watch. I started at 5 after.
That's right. It is 20 minutes, so I didn't want you to go over that. Thank you. That was very interesting to hear about the implementation and the changes of the law that happens in Turkey and how it's been reformed and changed. And it's also interesting to see how they went back in some of the laws that's been advanced under the new government.
Not in the
And
laws.
you said like they changed the age from
I see. That's the only one, though.
yeah. So I hope it's not going to go to cover the whole
But
laws
just
that's happening.
correct, the criminal code was accepted by this government. I mean, that shows you the power of these NGOs. They harass them so much. They harass the parliament and government members so much that finally, you know, they had to say yes. Maybe because, like, you know, like men who don't attend women's conferences, they think that this issue isn't important. Let it write in the law, but reality will be different. Sure.
No, we have great attendance here from men from different sectors, so we appreciate it. And we open the floor for questions. So please, and you're next. Microphone. Microphone.
Okay, thank you all the three for interesting panel. But I learned a lot, Binaz, about Turkey, and your presentation was very informative. Now, my question to you is that given the power of women NGOs, the women's movement, even now currently, that compels the rather Islamic-oriented, moderately Islamic government of Turkey to go by these reforms. How do you see the prospect of the new trend in Turkey vis-a-vis women's rights? Do you think, given how powerful the women's movement is, can they really take back women and take away some of their rights that they have gained? Because the case of Turkey again confirms what Margot and I have been emphasizing, that theology is not enough. We need politics. We need strong women's movement. So what's your answer to that?
Actually, yeah. Just to add something, these groups that I cited, women's groups, are all secular women's groups. So it's not within an Islamic discourse that they're talking. It's really within Western feminist discourse that they've been arguing. And strangely enough, there isn't criticism of it, you know, in the country. I mean, nobody turns to these women and says, well, this isn't our tradition.
Huh? Universalist, humanitarian.
In other words, it's not with reference to the Quran or with reference to Islamic tradition or with reference to an Islamic idiom and ideology that these women are pushing for their for rights. About on your question, first of all, let me point out that these changes have been accepted by the great majority of the people. I mean, after so many years, since the 1920s. So it would be very difficult, I think, for any government to change it. I did a study with a colleague in 1999, one of them, in 1999, based on survey research, which looked into attitudes towards religion, politics, and so on. And one of the questions had to do with the Sharia, Islamic law. Because around that time, this was when Refah was in power and had just resigned. All surveys show that about 20% of the population wanted the Sharia back. And I thought, this is crazy. I mean, this can't be true. That perhaps if you ask pious people whether they want Islamic law, because they don't know what it involves, they might say yes. So I thought we'll ask questions explaining the secular codes as well as the Islamic code. So we asked that question that was being asked in every survey. Would you like an Islamic state based on Islamic law in this country? We get 20%. Okay? And then we probed into it. According to the civil code, a man can marry only one woman. That was in 1926 that polygamy was banned. Whereas, according to Islamic law, he may marry up to 4. Would you like the present code to change to Islamic law? Immediately that 20% drops. and especially among to 8%, and especially among women it's even lower. So another question of inheritance. According to the civil code, men and women inherit equally, whereas according to the Islamic code, women inherit less. Would you like the code to change to the Islamic code? Again, it drops. Same over custody on children and so on. So there is this incredible, except for maybe 7-8%, the rest of the country, including in rural areas, because this was representative, has accepted these changes. So I don't think there can be any go back legally, but socially there can be. And I think that is, for years, secularists in Turkey were afraid that Islamists would take over, and what happened in Iran, for example, might happen in Turkey as well. I always thought that this was impossible, and but what is possible is to Islamize the country so that it becomes so much more conservative than before. I mean, I can't, I don't have time now, but there's some new research I did based on in-depth interviews in smaller cities in Anatolia. And what I observed and what we were told is that these cities are getting more and more conservative, more and more gender segregated. Even in apartment buildings where, they put up 2 elevators, or the apartment buildings with 2 elevators, 1 for women, 1 for men. Even in hospitals, for example, state hospitals, this doctor I was talking to, he says, we used to have a coffee room where all of us met to relax. And in the last few years, our women colleagues stopped coming. And he says, I'll tell you something funny. And also he says, women colleagues used to enter our offices to ask our opinion about cases and so on. And they stop coming, or they will talk to you at the door but never enter. And he says, I'll tell you something funny. Now when they enter, when one of them enters, I keep saying to myself, what does she want? My attitude has changed, he says. So there is that kind of creeping conservatism that worries a lot of Islamists. And the government, because of past experience, is very, very careful not to violate any of the secular laws of the republic, because they know they're going to get into trouble, and they have gotten into trouble. So the secular laws remain, but there's anyway.
Thank you very much. The next question here, and please identify yourself and your affiliations. Here. Oh, there is.
I'm Mohammed Ali Atasi, Arab visiting journalist in Woodrow Sultan. Please, can you explain to us if some women organization, secular women organization, do any kind of work or campaign for the liberty of women to put the veil, scarf head, or no? It's not considered like one of their agenda.
No, they're Islamist women's organizations.
Not secular.
No, not the secular. Although the secular women's organizations, some of them do not approve it. For instance, this organization that works on inclusion of women, that works about inclusion of women in politics, they have explicitly stated that they don't care, who it is, whether an Islamist woman, Kurdish woman, any woman who's interested in entering politics can join, although, of course, covered women cannot go to parliament.
But can I have your point of view on this issue? You think this kind of law help to, amend the scarf head, or is on contrary, encourage some women to put it like a statement, political statement? Or
that I don't know. I mean, that's the claim of secularists in Turkey, that is for political reasons that they're wearing it. When you do surveys, and so many people have done it, and you ask covered women why they cover, they say because my religion demands it. So it's very hard to prove it. It's possible that some of these women originally were forced to cover and then gradually decided that, they're doing the right thing, that their religion demands of it. But, I mean, we don't have figures to prove that these women are doing it for political reasons. They don't say it. They won't say that it's for a political reason they do it. If you ask my opinion about this covering business, I have always argued that students should be allowed to attend universities, students who cover, because education is a right, and so is the right to believe. And you cannot say to a person, choose one right over the other. Only for university students, though, I would not advocate it, and there's no movement in Turkey anyhow right now, but it might come later if university students were given the right. For high school students, below the age of 18, I would not, because everybody knows that in the Muslim world, a lot of young girls are really either convinced or forced or whatever you call it by families to cover. So you cannot assume that they're doing it on their own, by their own choice. But anybody over 18, I think you have to assume that it's because they choose it that they're covering. And I also would not advocate it for government employees. That also is a problem because, those who are against the headscarf in universities say that, well, why do we give them education if they cannot be employed in so many different professions? But as long as there's a private sector, I think, if government was the only employer, that would make sense. But I think government employees should not carry anything on themselves that shows the other person, the person who's getting that service, that they are religious. I mean, I could give you examples of, for example, some of these Islamist women in medical universities who were demanding, both the men and the women, demanding that the corpses on which they experiment should have panties and bras and so on. The universities didn't budge because, what are you going to do? You're on duty in a state hospital and somebody of the other sex comes who's bleeding from sexual organs. You can't say it's against my religion, I can't look, and so on. So anyhow, huh?
Doctors for medical doctors.
It's what?
Islam allows an exception for medical doctors. I don't understand this.
I don't know whether Islam does or not. I have no idea, actually. Is it in the Quran?
It's not everything in the Quran, so...
Yeah, I don't know whether it allows or not, but that was their demand.
We have a person here. Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. My name is Kelly Memphis. I work with the International Association of Women Judges, and my question would also have been good for the first panel, so if anyone afterwards has something to add, I'd be happy to talk to you. Everyone was talking a lot about women's rights organizations or how many women are in parliament or laws or what countries have signed CEDAW and all of these things as being important for women's rights to be realized. But in my organization's experience, a really important factor are judges, how they understand the laws, how they're ruling on cases. Like a law can be in a book, but if a judge doesn't rule, okay, you can keep half the property, then a woman will still be property, like not have property. And women judges are more inclined to want to be educated, to educate their communities, to educate other judges. I'm wondering, in your research and your experience, have any of you thought about this? Do you have any ideas about how many women are judges in the countries that you've studied, how that contributes to the issue? Because I found that often people will talk about parliament, everything like that, but they don't pay attention to women judges. And so I'm wondering, do you have anything to tell me about that?
Okay, thank you. Saad, please.
No, I mean, with regard to judges, I mean, they were pointed out as being, I mean, with the Moroccan cases, the reason, I mean, at least the reports that women NGOs have been releasing that, I mean, some of the NGOs have, like, now the custom of, like, annually publishing reports about the implementation where judges are pointed out as being the origin of the problem, that because of their, patriarchal interpretation of the law. Now, on the one hand, you have, this law that came out, but there is not enough funding that was put in order to educate judges on the law. So there is a problem with the judges' training. The other thing is that, I've talked to some of the judges, and they were talking about cases where although they would be convinced of the new law that came out in 2004, and they really believe in, women's rights for equality, etc., they have to deal with cases. For example, this just was telling me that, he, for example, has to deal with cases where a woman, for example, who lives, in a remote area of the country. Morocco is, a country where education, is a right, but also schools are not everywhere in the country. Access to education is still not, possible for everybody. So this woman who is, because one of the amendments of the law was the age of marriage was, now is 18 for both men and women. It used to be 15 for women and 18 for men. Reports are talking about a very high rate of marriages under the age of 18. And this example of the judge that came to my mind, he was talking about cases where this woman would come with her parents, and the father would be, if she doesn't get married, where is she going to go? She does not go to school. The school is too far, and her only, quote, career is a marriage. So if she, waits until she's 18, nobody's going to marry her, because, for in certain communities in the country, if a woman is more than 14, it's too late for her to find a husband. And so there are many cases, and so where the judges are really torn between ideals of equality and that the law is trying to promote, but then the socioeconomic, conditions that make it very hard to, implement the law on the ground.
In Egypt, first of all, it's been a long standing feminist demand for women to be able to be judges, appointed judges, and it only happened a few years ago. But what was interesting in the final push, there were it was a combination of secular and religious arguments, and some of the activists, Mona Zulfikar and a whole lot of others, were explained how they were using a combination of secular and religious discourses to push for change. And of course, it was the politics had to be right. But and then recently there was a problem of women in the Conseil d'État, the Council of State, and they were not allowed. But I think that's been readjusted.
Mm. In Turkey, women could become judges. My mother was one, for example, as early as 1930s, and there were large numbers of them. I think their numbers are decreasing. I'd have to check the figures, but that's what I know, that over the years they have, especially under this government, whether or not, they would misinterpret the law in favor of or against women. I don't think there are any studies that look into the difference between male judges and female judges. On an issue like inheritance, no judge could decide, no matter how you go around it. So on many of these issues, polygamy, inheritance, custody over children, marriage, and so on, divorce, nobody could use their judgment, but on honor killings, they always did. I don't know, how women judges reacted, but they always gave sentence reductions on honor killings and rape cases and violence against women. So it's a major problem in Turkey too, as well as far as the criminal code is concerned, not the civil code that deals with inheritance, marriage, divorce, and so on, but the criminal code. That's why I think these changes are so important. The recent changes are so important because they can no longer use judgment. In other words, there are no sentence reductions for honor killings, for example. And there are no reductions for different kinds of rape, as I just said, because definitions have been expanded to include all different kinds of cases. But I don't know whether it will, in reality make much of a difference. We'll see.
Thank you. Sabira Qureshi, I'm an independent gender consultant. That was a lot of food for thought, both the morning panel as well as the second panel, and one could come up with 100 different questions. It's been very interesting to listen to the different approaches that have been followed in different countries, in different regions, going back to the point made earlier on that the goals are universal, equality. The means to get there may differ from region to region. But I think what comes out very prominently is the need to be clear on concepts and definitions. And that brings me to your point about defining family and what constitutes a family in Islam. And I was just thinking, given your emphasis as well as Naira's emphasis in the morning about distinguishing between theology and politics, but we know the very close linkages between the two, and how as we negotiate space to talk about family and women's rights as we move forward, we are not going to move to what everyone is calling the secular. We will leave out the definition of secular, and certainly not Western secular. I think if we can just try and keep it to a very, very sort of indigenous, many different forms of indigenous secular frameworks, we need to negotiate as we move towards these universal goals. And I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on what kind of work is being done in terms of defining what constitutes a family, and how we can use that as the basic premise to then move towards a more equal legal framework for family codes and other changes that a lot of countries are moving towards.
First of all, when I said what we need is not more theology but more or better politics, of course it's a quip in a sense, but what I meant is I think we have very well developed answers and arguments, and that we don't need necessarily to go on and on and on and on and develop them further, although there are very interesting academic questions and intellectual questions that might be, delved into. But I was trying to say, in terms of using the arguments, I think we have a strong repertoire there, and that we need to be clever in the political activism and use of them. And of course, naturally, I totally agree. I mean, that it's about negotiation. And it's also, I had a piece in the paper that I didn't go into, but it's also about, in terms of achieving change in Muslim and personal status laws, it's really one ultimately needs the political will from on high. And the two prime examples we have of egalitarian family laws, Turkey and Morocco, it is because there was the will from on high. Now, also, Tunisia. I was just thinking of on the panel. Of course, Tunisia. but although I don't think you have equal head of family declared as such and I didn't see it. But in any case, yes, the 1956 law. I realize it was at the head of the list. I mean, it was in the head, and it was amended afterwards. But the thing is that that there have to be all kinds of negotiations. There have to be the sort of a favorable political environment, and there has to be constant pressure, and there need to be feminist, Islamic, secular, whatever activism. As far as the family is concerned, all I have noticed, and I particularly noticed it in the Musawa movement, is when they talk about the needing to change the Muslim family. Now, there is a Muslim personal status law, for example, in Egypt or wherever. This is clear. We know this. But I just have a problem with the Muslim family, because also Islamic feminism is about reacting to the lived realities and applying interpretation, tafsir, and so on to lived realities. And the lived realities are so complicated now. And the family, I don't see how we can denominate a family, all families, or as we can't call them Muslim or Christian, because so many of us are in these mixed families, and whose religion do you choose? But I maybe others here know more about empirical work to ascertain the numbers. But I was just bringing it up as something we really need to be attentive to, and also in the context of cross-religious activism, that we can't eliminate somebody because of religious affiliation from the Islamic feminist activist front. Yeah.
Is there a mic? One for me.
And then we have one last question over there.
I can have a seat. Thank you.
Maybe everybody could ask questions.
Look, regarding the family, I think an interesting change is also taking place. You have now women at the head of families. And for example, if you take the example of Iran, after the Iran-Iraq war, there were a great number of widows. So the problem of child custody rose. And so it automatically would go to the male member of the father's family. So Ayatollah Khomeini then issued a fatwa, which then became law, that child custody of a widow of a fallen soldier would not go to the man, but will stay with the woman as long, but, there is a but, as long as she doesn't get
married again.
But later on, this became a law. The but and the if went on. So this, and I believe, and I have to look into that, there must be the same case in Iraq now. I mean, you have so many women who are head of the family. I mean, Zainab might add to this, So I think this is an important change, which is taking place in our region. I suppose there must be the same problem in the Palestinian territory too. I mean, if you live in Gaza, I mean, what sort of law is relevant there? Margot mentioned something about mixed families and, what sort of the problem of religion when it comes to that. It was an interesting, decision taken in pre-revolutionary Iran, which continued even now, was that the minorities, in Iran, the people of the book, meaning the Jews and the Christians, are recognized as official minorities alongside Zoroastrian. So they went to the government, and this was before the family protection law that Nayere talked about it, and asked whether the minorities can abide by their own personal status law and not follow the Islamic law which was ruling at the time. So Parliament approved that. So the Jews and the Christian in Iran, when it came to personal status law, meaning marriage, inheritance, polygamy, child custody, etc., followed the ruler. And this continued. And as far as I know, and I believe Nayere would attest to that, that this has not tampered with. While polygamy among the Muslims in Iran is the law of the land with certain conditions, among the Jews and the Christians, you just cannot go to court and say, I'm an Iranian, but I'm a Christian Iranian, or I'm a Jewish Iranian, therefore I want to marry more than one wife. No, that's not possible. So just
that was a very good question. But also for mixed marriages and the definition of family is related to the question of citizenship. Who can transmit citizenship? There are many women in Iran who have married Afghan refugees or Iraqi refugees. They cannot transmit citizenship to their children. So they are not recognized as a family, as a Muslim family, because it doesn't, even though they are married to a Muslim, but their children are not Iranian citizens. So there are lots of other issues involved here, not only the issue of mixed marriages, but marriage with non-Muslim, which women are not allowed to, right? In Iran, a woman, if she wants to marry a non-Muslim, has to get the permission of the government first.
And the government, will they give them permission?
It depends. It depends. I guess most of the time they can convince the government if they can convince that the husband is going to convert to Islam. So otherwise, no. So I'm saying it's really a good question that you are starting, because it takes us to other issues like citizenship, this double standard about men being able to marry non-Muslims but women not. And
our next meeting will cover that.
I promise one last question here. So
yeah,
please quick.
Can you wait for the mic, please?
She has a mic.
You have a mic? Okay.
I was going to say that this issue of women's NGOs being very active in Turkey, Madeleine Zilfi from the University of Maryland did a study where she found that of all the court cases brought in Ottoman courts, 50% of them were brought by women in all areas. So women have been active in Turkey throughout. That's one thing. But the question that I had for you, Dr. Toprak, was, it seems to me in the cities, Turkey has a very, very generous welfare system for women. So if their husbands die, they get payment from the government. If their fathers die, they continue throughout the families. And maybe my question is going to be a little bit, I guess, unpopular, in the sense that it seems to me that if women didn't have this wonderful, generous caretaking thing, and I think it's a huge burden on the population, that they might actually have to think about having to go to work. And if they had to go to work, then they'd be more concerned about their education, about being involved in politics. Because right now, in Istanbul, I've seen whole cities, these neighborhoods full of widows, well taken care of by everybody else's tax dollars that don't work a day in their lives. And what do you think about that?
Truthfully, I don't know how much they get. I doubt that they would be able to live on the money that they get from the government. The social welfare system isn't really that well in Turkey. I know, for example, for child help, you get so little. I know it from my own paycheck. Something like 50 liras a month it used to be, which was like $10 for a kid.
But they're getting it from their husband. Like if their husband's work pays. Their husband's
if the husband dies,
and the father too.
Dies,
so the father dies, the husband. So they get all of these different things, right?
I really don't think that that's one of the major reasons why there's so few women in the workforce. I did another survey with a colleague precisely on this question of women's education, women's participation in the workforce, and women in politics and higher administrative and technical positions. And what we found out is that whether it's in politics, whether it's education, whether it's work, a lot of women will say that they were unable to get an education for economic reasons, because in the family there wasn't enough money. Their brothers were sent to school, but not them. They had to stay home. A lot of married women, for example, say that there's no place where they can leave their kids. They have to take care of kids. So, you know, no kindergartens that are free, that are provided by the state. So actually, if there were a much better social welfare system, and especially under this government, you know, social welfare has become even worse in the following sense, more problematic, because rather than through formal means, they give help informally to their supporters and followers and so on, through informal networks, you know, which is part of this business about grassroots organization, you know, in which they're very, very capable.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers for this wonderful panels, and special thank to Woodrow Wilson Center and Dr. Hala Esfandiari for putting this wonderful conference together, and her tireless team who have been, you know, communicating and doing all of this work on behalf of everyone. And thank you for being here.